people who are deconstructing and asking questions, it's because they want to have more dimension in their life and not less. For me, I've often, kind of seen people with these fundamental beliefs, and I talk about it in the book as like having their faith is like a house of cards, and they're realizing that we live in an increasingly windy world, and so they want to put up more walls because they want to protect that house of cards with everything that they can. And people who are deconstructing are like, I don't think it is a house of cards, and if it is, I want to build something else that's gonna hold up better.
Welcome to Grub and Grace, where we treat the table as a place for honest dialogue, spirited debate, and holy art of doubting faithfully. Here we untangle harmful theology, question the things we were told never to question, and still try to hold a little grace for people we disagree with. Yes, even those people. Around this table, every voice matters, especially the ones empire would rather ignore. Because when people wrestle with faith together, instead of pretending certainty, we might actually build something better than the systems we inherited. I am Mark Flower, I'm your host for the show, and I'm joined today by someone I had the honor of meeting at Theology Beer Camp last fall in St. Paul. Keith Long has been a Lutheran pastor for 14 years and is the author of 3 books, Doubting Faithfully, Confessions of a Skeptical Pastor, Growing Spirit-Wise, A Heretic's Guide to Resurrection and Eternal Life, and Movie Makers, a novella. Keith has also written for New Testament scholar Bart D. Ehrman's blog. He studies expanded consciousness in his free time and loves his home state of Minnesota, where he resides with his family. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to be here. It's good to have you on here. We did briefly meet at Theology Beer Camp. It was very briefly. It was kind of funny because I think it was during lunchtime. They were handing out lunch, and I think you and a friend were eating lunch, and then I was just looking for somewhere just to eat a sandwich because I was running around, and I think I was talking with so many people that I just was holding my sandwich in my hand, and there happened to be a chair next to you, and I think I just pulled up and I was just like, hey, can I sit here?
Yeah, and then it turns out we were both kind of looking for each other in a certain way. You were just kind of getting the blog or the podcast started, and I had some books burning in my backpack. I was anxious to give away to people like you that I could maybe have further conversation with. So that all worked out.
Here's that book
well.
right here, Doubting Faithfully. If you're just listening to the podcast, obviously you can't see the book, but it's called Doubting Faithfully, A Confession of a Skeptical Pastor, which I got a chance to read, and honestly, it was like I loved it. It's a short read. It's only how many pages is it?
It's just about 100 pages. Yeah.
Yeah, just under. It's like 80 pages. It's really not that long, but you pack a good amount in there, though, and it's not like heavy and dense. It's like a lot of stories, but you bring a lot of kind of life and color to those stories, though, too. Yeah,
well, that's kind of my pastoral vibe is, when you're preaching, especially, like you gotta. Don't be boring, right? And try not to be too heavy. So yeah, I try to find ways to connect with, I kind of keep like my high school friends in my mind, like that they're not big readers, but if I can make it accessible for them, then I feel like it'll connect with pretty much anybody. So that's kind of what I keep in mind when I do writing projects is, don't be boring, keep it short and keep it entertaining,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely got that impression from it.
Well, especially in a book like this where it's a lot to grapple with, and so I wanted to. I feel like I've read books like this that go on longer than they maybe should, and so to me it's most important. I love having conversation about this kind of thing, so I try to keep it conversational too.
Yeah, it's one of those things like growing up in the church and just kind of never questioning anything, just kind of accepting. You go to church on Sunday and, whatever the pastor preaches, he must know what he's talking about. And usually it's a he. They just kind of go with the flow and everybody is kind of in agreement. Like, oh, that was a good sermon, and clap their hands and, good worship service, rock band worship service and all that. But then, there's times in your life where things maybe just don't line up or It just kind of makes you think a little bit, or someone comes in your life that, makes you start questioning the little things by the things they say. And, pebble after pebble, it just kind of creates this sense of, is doubting okay for me? And especially in your instance, where being a pastor and doubting after becoming a pastor, that was probably a bigger kind of hurdle to kind of get over, where you have this stigma of like the pastor's got to know everything. And you address this in the book. You're like, the pastor's got to know everything. And like, if I'm the one doubting, is anybody going to be willing to come to my church? Is anyone going to be willing to even listen to me when I say that I really don't have all the answers? And I thought it was just a different way of looking at it, because I've got my own story, but everyone's got their own story. And I've never really heard much from another pastor talking about their journey through asking these big questions. So yeah, it was very interesting.
Well, thanks for reading it in a way that's willing to put because you have to put yourself out there, like reading a book about doubt in faith. And so I think it's just as much as the reader being vulnerable, because you are engaging into somebody's vulnerability. And so I think the honesty kind of has to go both ways in something like this. So thanks for reading it.
Yeah, of course. So I'll jump into this first little segment here. So in your book, you talk about your journey through deconstruction and how the loss of your good friend was very influential to you along this path. For binary constants like God being a he, were all being questioned. You missed the days when none of these things were conscious thought. You describe this time of your life almost in a 1984-esque sort of way, feeling like you had to constantly look over your shoulder for thinking differently than your Christian community did, making you feel isolated and alone. You prompted a question: had I ever felt God's presence, or was that just something I conditioned myself to think? Which I love that line. I've heard similar sentiment, honestly, from many other of my friends that I have talked to about their deconstruction journey. So what was helpful for you as you navigated the big questions?
Yeah, so great question. I think for me, it was above all, being comfortable in my own skin and knowing that, just having a lot of self-grace for that, because like you said, it was isolating, and I didn't want to be beating myself up for having questions that, you encouraged of congregation members and youth alike, that just like, it's okay to question. So that same grace that I extended them, I extended to myself. Like, it's okay to have these questions, especially with how much time I spend, reading the scriptures and studying and preparing. And so I'm just in it all the time. So for me, it was just kind of like, well, it's normal, to normalize it in a sense, to be like, did this really happen? And to wrestle with it in a way that wasn't, not shaming myself. I did have to kind of be careful about who I talked to about that season of my life. At the time, I was kind of nervous. Like, I didn't want to derail somebody else's faith. I wanted to just own my own journey. But yeah, there are people that look to you to be the strong rock in the faith. So, but we constantly as pastors, we're like, but we're people too. We're not gods. We're just regular people who have gifts for ministry. So at first it was just basically just like, it's fine, dude, just relax, and gave myself a lot of that grace. I kind of told myself, like, it's humans that need the order and the structure in their lives, and that God alone is free. And so I kind of approached that section, even when I was, questioning the existence of God, it was still just like, but God, my God doesn't have like a clipboard going, like questions faith, like you're out. And so I kind of gave myself just this structured freedom and flexibility to work with all the ingredients, and to set some aside if I needed to. And I would ask myself, like, what's good about this, and then also what might be short-sighted or what might be causing harm. And so that's kind of how I ordered that time. But I also found a lot of help from the Buddhists. And so I don't know how I had gotten this book in my possession, but there's an American nun, quote her in Doubting Faithfully, I think at the end. Pema Chodron is her name. And the book is When Things Fall Apart. And so I underlined that whole book. It really spoke and resonated with me. in the sense of like, she really encourages getting, kicked out of the nest and treating that as a good thing, as a way to really reflect on the learning that you're doing as you're, in this instability moment. And what I really liked about what she said was not treating it as a means to an end, because I had often heard that faith crises for Christians was kind of like, oh, you have to doubt in order for your faith to get stronger. And she really encouraged, like, instead of treating your doubt as a means to an end, treat it as the end in of itself. Like, it's okay to just sit with your uncertainty and not like rush to have to solve it in order to be stronger. And so I'd say those, that self-grace and again, some Buddhist thought was really, helpful for me.
Yeah, I did notice that quote. I was trying to look for it. I couldn't find it just off the cuff of my sleeve there, but I do appreciate you using the word ingredients, and especially a podcast called Grubbing Grace. That sneak in there, but
there you go.
And like I was mentioning, like you journey through the deconstruction and losing a good friend. At this time, I had lost someone close to me recently, and it was one of those books that just like, at that time in my life, it really just kind of struck a little bit more with me. Some of your stories felt a little bit more personal, and everybody goes through loss of life. It's the death rate of everyone is pretty close to 100% for every person. So it's and there's people around that are gonna. Everybody dies at some point in their life. So it's somebody, you're going to lose somebody in your life. You're going to lose lots of people in your life. And how do you deal with that, and how do you work through that? And I think along that question of, doubting your faith, and not just doubting, but like questioning and asking these big questions, it's like you really add in this other layer of kind of grief and working through that alongside with everything. And I feel like that can actually bring a lot of people to coming to this question, front of, and I definitely got that from you. That was a big part of you bringing you where you are right now is the loss of your friend.
Absolutely. Death is that great equalizer that puts us all on the same footing and makes us all experts of our own grief. And, I counsel people as a pastor, like, there's no like right way to do grief, or there's no wrong way. You just have to lean into it and figure out what you need, and then be free to do and handle that process as best you can. And I think that was kind of the eye opener for me with death of Carl. Was I had been countless bedsides of other people's family members, my own family members, but then losing someone that was considered religiously other by the institution, that was just like threw me out of that nest and made me ask some really big questions. It was the death, of a lot of things at that time. Grief is a great catalyst. It sucks, but it's a great catalyst.
I've like reading your book, it made me kind of think, like, I'm at this point now, and I wasn't always at this point. I had to go through this kind of journey, so to say, to get where I'm at, what I believe, and finding my own way to believe and way to see the world and everything. And I oftentimes ask, like what would I ask my younger self? Because like Tim Whitaker, he's talking about how he always likes to share about the concept of like those in this like stuck in this evangelical kind of community, very like narrow-minded of Christianity is like the basement of fundamentalism. And when you come out, you see that there's all these other rooms of Christian thought that you've never knew were there, but now you're seeing it, you're like what is this? It's like a full house of all these different rooms. And it just kind of makes you think, like, what would you say to your younger self? So I'll reflect that back on you. If you could question your past deconstructing self, what would you say to him?
So I don't know. Let's see. I think for me, it really came back to not underestimating the fearful insecurity and closed-mindedness of those with orthodox beliefs. That would be the one piece of advice, reflecting on that question that you sent me a week ago and just thinking about that. I wasn't naive. Like, I knew that deconstructing as a pastor was a risk, and I I definitely, that's where there was hesitation, and yet I was just so fired up that I knew I had to publish, that it wouldn't just be good enough to just put it as a blog or something. But, I had this narrative and I felt really good about it. And yet, I knew, things are going to change when I publicize this, right? And so I think my advice is just, it's not necessarily like I would do it any differently, but I definitely misjudged one of my relationships. I sent the book to somebody and I just totally misjudged that person, and it really backfired on me, and that relationship was kind of ruined as a result of asking for their thoughts. They ended up being way more orthodox than I anticipated, and so that really that stings, like it's just getting kind of blindsided. And so I was, that I think just understanding that people with orthodox beliefs, something like this it's like throwing a punch, and so I just think that, that resistance I didn't necessarily anticipate, from people that, again, I thought would be totally cool with it. I knew that there'd be resistance, but then when you poke the bear, like, you're gonna get some wounds, and I have the scars to prove it from doing that. And yeah, like I said, I knew what I was doing, and I knew that it was going to be a risk. But yeah, I think just, there are some relationships that ended up being strained as a result. And it's just kind of sad, that it had to be because of me trying to be honest and more authentic, and them taking it as an affront or as me being, somehow trying to tear down their faith, which I wasn't intending to do that at all. But they then became like they pitied me when they thought all these, like, again, those thoughts that a lot of people on the Orthodox world think of us deconstructing. You kind of mentioned this in a question later on about shallow thinking, and it's like, well, what are you gonna do, yeah. So that's kind of how I think is, if advice, it would just be, hey, make sure you align yourself with as many allies as possible, because someone's going to come at you and you're going to feel, there's going to be all the feels that go with that, and to just make sure you've got a strong group of people around you that do have your back and do, love what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and that can be such a difficult thing, like you're talking about, like getting over that hump. And I think that's honestly what keeps a lot of people in this kind of thinking mode of, like just stay with the status quo. Don't rock the boat, and I don't want any heat on me, sort of thing. But I found out very quickly, and I strained some relationships too after October 7th, 2023, when I started speaking out in support of the Palestinians and against the actions of Israel. And I strained many friendships by doing that. And it honestly felt very lonely, because I didn't really have any close friends that really saw eye to eye with me. Some people thought, like, oh, you're sticking to your convictions, cool. But it wasn't anything more than that. I had a lot of friends who were very outspoken against what I was saying, and were very much like, Israel, haha, and then I started coming out more as deconstructing myself, and then I started this podcast, and that strained more relationships because of what I was saying on it. And so I think doing that and kind of getting over that hump of like getting criticism on yourself. Now I see criticism as just, I'm able to brush it off a lot easier. I don't take it personally. I just think there's still sometimes I take it personally, but I'm able to kind of move past it a little bit more because I've kind of gotten over this hump. I realize what it is, and I see the shallowness in a way. I don't want to say that people's critiques are shallow, but some of them were, and I think those shallow critiques, I could see the flaws in their logic, and it allowed me to think that maybe having these large questions really helped me to get out of a shallow mindset of thinking for myself, and that's where I was. So definitely moving past that. And another thing I'll say is physicality of moving past boundaries too. Like in college, I would go and do some bridge jumping and getting over like a fear of height or anything like that, and knowing that it'll be okay once you hit that water and go in, like that distance, that time that you're in the air, it's scary for the moment, but it'll pass, and it'll start to wear away. So a common motif that you refer back to throughout your book is the idea of jumping off a ledge, which I'm well aware of that too. There is a French term called l'appel du vide. My French isn't perfect. I took one French class in school. So but in English, it translates to the call of the void, which is a feeling that tends to be a brief, entirely out of character, and often involves thoughts of leaping from a high place or driving headfirst into an oncoming vehicle. In a 2012 study, lead researcher Jennifer Hames concluded that somewhat paradoxically, the call of the void could well be a person's subconscious attempting to encourage a greater appreciation of what it feels like to be alive, as opposed to wanting to lure someone to their demise. When more and more people are deconstructing their faith, the tighter the church attempts to hold people in. So how do you suppose this call of the void may free people from binary high control religion?
Yeah, fantastic question, and totally resonate with that motif of the call of the void. I think maybe my first chapter might be like stepping into the void. So yeah, that just really resonates with me, and kind of my intention behind this experiment, I guess, of publishing doubt from within the institution. It made me think of the quote that Joseph Campbell has that says something similar to this, which is, he says, "I don't believe people are looking for the meaning of life as much as they are looking for the experience of being alive." And so I think when you have a clear purpose and intention of what you want to do, this goes for anything, whether it's a workout program or a new job, like you just get behind this purpose and you just go. And so, going back, talking about like the criticism that comes, Rob Bell, I heard Rob Bell speak at a 2-day conference about over 10 years ago now. But the one thing that stayed with me was, he said, when you get criticized, let it sting. Because it is personal, right? Like anyone who says, don't take this personally, and then tells you criticism, like you're going to take it personally. But he says, let it sting, but then remember what you're trying to do, and, remind yourself of your intent, and move on, and then put it behind you. And so I think, my intent was to feel more alive in my faith, to be more authentic as a follower of Jesus, as a leader, as a teacher. And my MO, in doing that has always been, or maybe it hasn't always been, but I've found great success in being really honest and being willing to be vulnerable. And so that decision motivated this quest. And I was not really finding the safety that I once had in religion. I started to realize I don't think there is a right way to believe. There's different ways to believe, some that are more helpful than others. And so, but between feeling more alive, being more authentic, and taking that risk to be vulnerable, and realizing that the system that I was in really couldn't guarantee my safety, and then throw in Carl's virtuous, atheism, and then it was kind of like, what do you now we've got a total kind of mess and chaos on our hands. You might as well just throw yourself behind your purpose and go for it. So I was tired of religion, high control religion, kind of suppressing who I wanted to be and who I saw myself as. I was constantly throwing these masks on in order to fit in with people who were Christian, and from hanging out with my friends and being in a really strict form of Christianity that said I couldn't swear, and I couldn't watch sex scenes in movies, and I couldn't, all these no's that I kept getting. It's just like, well, but so I was tired. I just, you kind of just get to a point where you're like, enough with the rules. I want to try this out for how I see it. And so it's, getting away from that, you have to make some of those, I think, just, rules for yourself. Like, how do I want to live in this life? Do I want to go by what someone else tells me all the time? Or is it okay sometimes to make my own way and see what happens? So I don't know. That's that's how I started to organize my thoughts around this. And I'm not perfect, and I know I didn't maybe do it exactly the way I should have, but I'm the one that has to sleep at night with how I carried myself. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I got to this point where I felt like I was screwed either way. If I stayed within the religion as is with these doubts, and I hid myself from who I really was, like that was not great. And if I put myself out there as being vulnerable and having doubts about the faith, like that also, it was like a win-lose. So I just decided I might as well just do things on my own terms, where I have a sense of freedom and authenticity, even if it doesn't work out.
And everybody comes across their own time when they decide they want to be themselves and just live authentically. You tell a story in your introduction of the book about a boy whose parents are concerned because he was expressing these deep philosophical and atheistic attitudes, even about all things God and the Bible. You express that his doubting, skeptical, and intellectual perspectives were in fact a sign of spiritual maturity, which I love that you use that word, that phrase, spiritual maturity, to express these sort of ideas. So could you tell us why you view the act of asking questions as a sign of maturity and sign of that spiritual growth? Yeah,
so in Christianity, it just had started to become clear that like the schools system, it seemed like it was more about pursuing certainty rather than celebrating curiosity, and that Christianity didn't really seem all that interested in someone's spiritual personal growth. It was more just like compliance with this is the platter of what you can choose from, and if it's not on the table, then that's not acceptable. And so someone who exhibits curiosity is now saying essentially that they're going to be courageous and make themselves vulnerable by asking a question and kind of going against the grain. And I see that as mature, because that's breaking free from the mindset that the universe revolves around you and that there might actually be something else that you don't know. It's I mean, immaturity to me is like a baby or someone who's really young, who they think everything revolves around them. Why would they extend themselves out beyond their little circle? Everything revolves around them. So someone who's willing to ask questions, to me, comes across as they're courageous enough and they've got thick enough skin that they actually do see themselves not as necessarily the only person in the room, but that there's other things that they want to learn and grow from. So I just think that that's a sign of tremendous maturity, especially in the church, where there's the catechism, and Martin Luther is like, okay, these are the things that everyone should believe, and this is what everything means, and memorize this. And that's a lot of some of our older members, that was their confirmation, was memorizing the small catechism, standing up and reciting it, or just memorizing scripture verses and call it good. And so I think having to actually critically think and wonder about something, that indicates to me that you're willing to step beyond what is required, I guess, of you. And that's a big step. You're going to be, that's being very vulnerable. And I think that's a great sign that even if you're questioning what you're absolutely not supposed to question, again, you want to know something. That's really cool. Mm-hmm. And I love those kids. I love engaging with those kids and adults that are but I know I'm supposed to think this way, but it's not gelling with my personal experience. Okay, now we've got something to work with, because now that you're doing the work of what I think Jesus wanted his disciples to do, which is you're starting to put the pieces together rather than just accepting somebody handing you the completed puzzle.
I want to kind of flip this question a little bit. With such a the church business is such a big business model. It's like a multi-billion-dollar business model per year. So when you get fundamentalists, apologists, and Bible literalists like Mike Winger makes claims that those who deconstruct faith are shallow thinkers. What would you say to people like that, or institutions like that?
I would say that it is impossible to have a reasonable conversation with people that are that close-minded. My experience has been people like Mike Winger. It's not far enough to say that they're the ones who are the shallow thinkers. That doesn't go far enough. They're just closed thinkers. They don't have depth. They don't want depth. People who are deconstructing and asking questions, it's because they want to have more dimension in their life and not less. And so when you engage with someone who's belittling and trying to, essentially make you look bad and get you down to their level, I mean, it's because they're not interested in growing. They feel afraid by what you're saying. And for me, I've often, kind of seen people with these fundamental beliefs, and I talk about it in the book as like having their faith is like a house of cards, and they're realizing that we live in an increasingly windy world, and so they want to put up more walls because they want to protect that house of cards with everything that they can. And people who are deconstructing are like, I don't think it is a house of cards, and if it is, I want to build something else that's gonna hold up better. And so when you engage in those conversations with people who are like attacking you and trying to make you look like you're the shallow thinker, it is an apples and oranges kind of situation. It's like, well, there's nothing really that I can say that, unless you show that you're open to what I'm having to say, I mean, I'm going to lower my expectations for what's actually going to come out of that conversation. I don't know, I've just found that the true adventurers are those that are willing to, they want to use different materials in building their faith, and to be a lot more, kind of adventure sport minded, from, kite surfing or cave spelunking, or, name your adventure sport, scuba diving. I mean, it's about digging, going deeper, exploring, trying different things, and seeing what sticks and what you can do without. And, people that don't get that, they're just a desert dweller. They just want to be on the ground level and have no real intention of leaving beyond. And, it's unfortunate. I just feel bad for them. So you can plant seeds, pray for rain, I don't know. But I guess I feel like you have to tread carefully and lower your expectations in engaging, unless you just want to debate them, but then you're just going to go round and round in circles, and no one's going to feel good at the end of that.
And no, there's not too many people that have ever come out of a debate that they've lost where they think, I've really changed my mind.
Totally, yes. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
A lot of times, when you're so entrenched in something, if facts don't really change anything, they just entrench you deeper, to be honest. So it's one of those things, like when you are talking to somebody, if you actually do decide you want to talk to somebody that's so entrenched and closed-minded and saying, I've got the truth and no one else has got the truth, and I'm going to fight everybody that thinks they do, you have to come at it a different approach. You have to come at it, plant those seeds of allowing them to think, and don't expect any quick changes. It's something that's going to happen over time. The more and more people that plant seeds, the faster that might take place. But you never go into it expecting that you're going to change someone's mind, especially when there's facts and such a closed mind approach.
Yeah, it goes both ways. I mean, we all get into our echo chambers, whether you're deconstructing your faith or you're Orthodox. Like you tend to kind of go in looking for your people to, cheer and say, yep, that's exactly what I believe. And so, I do think it's good to have people in your life that don't just echo back to you what your beliefs are, and hopefully you have a long enough relationship with that person where you can be honest with each other without it always becoming an argument, and truly try to see something from a different perspective. In my second book, I put in this kind of test called the open-closed assessment, and kind of just always having in your own mind, like, what's my openness to change on this topic? Is it am I completely closed, or am I like a 7 or an 8 where I'm, more established but still, open to changing my mind? And then either asking that of the other person that you're talking to, like, how open are you actually to changing your mind on this topic? And for those long-standing friendships, those really ones that are trusting, you'll either know what their number is already, or they will be honest with you. And if they're feeling like, you know what, I really don't want to change my mind about this, well, then what good is it going to be having this conversation? And so it goes both ways. It is important to still, and that's what I love about the church, is that lots of different opinions and lots of different experiences that those opinions are based on. And so it really does come back to like hearing people's story and kind of getting a sense of like, oh, now I see why you're coming at it from this, perspective, and then that can help your own perspective.
Well, I'm still deconstructing this side of me, because I still get entrenched sometimes. I think later, like a day or two, I realize, how close-minded I may have been during a conversation, but it's still one of those things I'm working on. And I think knowing that yourself, that you can do that yourself, you can be so close-minded, it helps with a little bit of, understanding that in other people and seeing yourself in other people. I think that's definitely helps in a journey of understanding all that. So you place a number of quotes in your book, mainly at the chapter heads. And there is one that really stood out to me. It was from Aristotle. It reads, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." When someone starts deconstructing, they already start this process by toying with different points of view, whether they are aware of it or not. So what is it that prevents people from initiating this kind of processing, particularly within the church?
I think it's primarily two things. I think it's the emotional attachment that people have put their beliefs on. The container that they've put their beliefs into has a lot of just emotion to it. So especially people who their faith helped them get through a really difficult time, that developed just a lot of emotional intensity to those beliefs. And so to question something that in the past was really helpful, that's a big leap for some Christians and other people of faith to make. And that's where, again, like those conversations you get into, you're stepping into, potentially like emotional landmine, field, and you don't realize, I just want to have a conversation about, Jesus' death, and, somebody has just this emotional attachment to that doctrine, and then you just step on a landmine, right? And so I think there's just a lot of that emotion that you have to regulate for yourself and be cognizant of when it comes to that, that questioning journey. But it's just hard. I mean, it's for someone who has spent their whole life being conditioned and yeah, it is a conditioning in a lot of religious circles where, that Christianity narrative, is looking for you to assent, mentally assent, like, yes, this is the way it is. And then you keep reinforcing that over and over, depending on who your preacher has been, who they want you to just keep echoing back, like, yep, you're right, that's exactly it. So that just develops lots of layers, right? So that conditioning can be really hard to just break out of just because. So I don't think the church necessarily intended to create critical thinkers either. They want you to believe these things because in doing so, then you're going to heaven, or whatever has been promised through these beliefs. So it's just a lot of sweat equity. I think in general, people are pretty lazy when it comes to their Christian faith, because that's, again, how the system was designed and how it was built. Jesus died for your sins, believe and be saved. Bada bing, there you go. Like, that's all you need to do. There's, like that's how it's been packaged and sold. And if you've got emotional belief, emotional equity and investment in that, like that's going to be really hard to break out of. If you're just not really interested in those kinds of things, then that's also going to be difficult. It's for people like us who say, yeah, but, and can I just ask a question about this? Or then, we've broken through some of those emotional attachments, or we've created new emotional attachments that say, it actually really makes me mad, and I don't want to be a mad person. I want to have peace. So I need to focus on this thing that makes me mad and come to a better resolve with that. And then there are some people who just get mad and they leave and they don't ever want to not be mad. They just, whenever it comes up, they're just pissed off and they don't want to go there, and you just have to honor that and be like, okay, it's everyone in kind of in between mad and super, toxically positive. You try to find that middle ground to say, what do you actually think about this if you have to like give an explanation yourself? And it's those people that I think are more ready to engage in this journey. And for everyone else, you just have to kind of, okay, got it. I will back up and allow you to do your thing.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you say toxic positivity, because that's definitely who I used to be.
Really?
I used to be in that toxic positivity, and I'm glad I'm out of it. I mean, I still have my positive side, but I feel like I've moved definitely more into the realistic and just understanding the nuance between so many things in life, and just not wanting to just be like, no, I'm just gonna sit in this little category of what I want to be or where I want to be at, and I'll just sit there and just ignore the rest of the world. I'm glad I moved on from that.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with being positive, but there's definitely something wrong with being too positive.
Yeah. So you say that you're eager to move on from Christian messaging that lords Jesus' death to bully or frighten people into believing. The example was needing Jesus to die for us to get something in return, which makes Jesus' death transactional. I've talked about this with the book Hellbent on another episode, but you mentioned that for true spiritual growth, healing, and the feeling of aliveness to occur, a person needs to be willing to question, struggle, and be wrong. Like, be okay with being wrong. The thought of being wrong about something can be a difficult pill to swallow. So, would you say it is important to be okay with being wrong?
Absolutely. I mean, you have to be okay with being wrong whenever you're in an experimenting mode. I mean, scientists are wrong all the time whenever they're trying to prove their hypotheses. It's the wrong which leads to their learning and growth. Yeah, it is a tough pill to swallow because there's a lot of power that's attached with being right, and then therefore a lot of powerlessness that's attached to being wrong. But from my standpoint, one of the things that draws me to Jesus continually is his humility and his willingness to be vulnerable, his willingness to draw that out of others. And so I feel like being willing to be wrong is just, it's about humility. That's your opportunity to live out that Jesus-like, humility and authenticity is risking that you could just be wrong. Sometimes you can laugh off being wrong, and sometimes being wrong is deeply hurtful. And again, another one of Jesus' tenets is forgiveness and grace. And so those are opportunities to let your human side come out and know that I screwed up and I need to forgive myself for that. If you get forgiveness from the person you hurt, that's bonus. But I mean, it really comes down to, can I forgive myself for this? And so being wrong, I think, is just a huge part of this creating a new system, a new faith building, or whatever you want to call from what you've done with your deconstruction is where's the humility in doing this? Because if there isn't humility, if it's just now you're trying to create a system that's just about right belief, well then you're literally no better than the thing you just deconstructed. You're just trying to do it your own way. So yeah, I think it's a great way to be in a conversation. Like we just talked about with your openness is, I could be wrong about this, and I think that would help help me to grow from it, and so I think it's more Christian than certainty. Because being wrong or being willing to be wrong, I think that demonstrates a softness of the heart, where certainty is more about rigidity and trying to establish this concrete has to be this way. So I think that we have that need to feel right, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to be in that feeling either, as long as I think you're leaving space for the possibility that you might not be.
I like that. Well, it's just about time here. Again, we were just talking about this book, Doubting Faithfully. Pastor Keith, thank you again for entering my life and giving me this book. It was a great read, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope that other people are able to find it. Keith, where can people find this?
So I self-published Doubting Faithfully through the Amazon platform. So the only place you can get it is on Amazon. There's also an ebook of it. If you are anti-Amazon, just reach out to me. I've got hard copies. I'd be happy to send you a signed copy because I respect that. I just didn't know what I was doing when I self-published, and Amazon was literally the only thing, even though I was kind of like, am I selling my soul to sell to Amazon? But it was so easy. So anyway, you can get it on Amazon. I keep my website regularly updated, and so you can find my work there, which is authorkeithlong.com. I blog on there as well, and I post sermons occasionally, and I've got different links to things that I'm up to. So if you want to hear me preach, I got a link on the About page on my website about listening to sermons that I give here at my congregation. I'm doing some teaching through Question Church, which is an experimental online community for the spiritually curious. And so that's once a month. You can check in through there. So yeah, that's pretty much how you can get a hold of me. Email address is in my books and on the website. I'd love to have conversation with people and answer questions and receive your criticism so I can grow from it.
Now, I noticed you also said that you are developing a lecture series. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, so I love to teach. It's just in my bones, and obviously I've done that through writing, but I've developed a 7-part lecture series on the future of religion and spirituality. My hope is to just get out into churches and other communities, either online or in person. There are 50-minute lectures with time for Q&A. The list of those lectures is on my website under presentations. I've presented at churches before, and yeah, I'm a filmmaking major, and my undergrad is in filmmaking, so visual image is important to me, so I put together PowerPoint presentations to go with these presentations, again, to open the dialogue and have more conversation. So yeah, it's the Jesus Beyond Christianity is the title of the lecture series. And like I said, you can find that on the website.
Very cool. I might have to have you on a future episode to talk about expanded consciousness, because obviously we don't have enough time right now, but I don't know much about it. But when you sent me that, I had to Google it, and I was like, oh, so this is like a big thing. So
yes.
Maybe we can plan another talk.
I would love to do that. Yeah, I'm actually, I'm contemplating, going back to get more school and education around the topic of expanded consciousness. And even if I don't, I've read so much and listened to so many podcasts, and the science around non-local consciousness is growing, and I do feel like if people can tap their own personal journey, that learning about consciousness it gives you such a different perspective especially about suffering and your own journey of faith. And I do feel like it's the future of the way we engage religion and spirituality. And so yeah, it's a deep passion of mine, and I'd love to come back and talk about it and to point people in direction of some resources that I've found really meaningful.
Yeah, no, I'd love to talk more into that. Well, maybe we'll run into each other at Theology Beer Camp this year. It's in Kansas City. If anybody is wondering, you can find, get your tickets to it at homebrewedchristianity.com. I think that's just the web address for it. Or you can just Google Theology Beer Camp 2026. You should be able to find that. I'm still on the fence. I think you're thinking about going. Ian McConnell I just talked to. I think he's thinking about going too. So there'll be a number of people there. It's constantly growing every year. There's more and more people that go. So yeah, maybe we'll run into each other this coming year, a little later in the year.
Yeah, it's a great way to meet people that are doing this journey as well, and they're a fun group, and yeah, you might run into somebody who then you end up on their podcast. So
there you go. Well, Keith, it was a real pleasure talking to you today. Thanks again for coming on here.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks for what you're doing, and look forward to hearing more of your podcasts in the future. I think you're doing a great job.